exciting. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to present with you all today, and I want to share with you what has very quickly become passion and purpose for me. This is a project born of love, and it is one that is born in service. So as we sit here together, I want to help you figure out ways that you can improve your service and how by improving our own services, we are better able to serve the communities that depend on us, especially those who have different abilities, okay? A description of myself would be exuberant, bright, lively, excited, passionate. And I hope that that kind of relays on camera. I'm trying to give as many descriptive words as possible. I decided to do one of my favorite things, which is involve myself with one of my favorite colors of lipstick, which is bold red, mostly because I love the color, but secondly, because I'm an avid lipstick collector. I have around 400 at this point. So that's a little bit of a fun fact for you. And I've discovered that the reason why I love decorating my lips is because I love communication, which is why I became a speech and language pathologist. So as I give you my viewpoints and my phenomenological approach to supporting individuals who live in poverty, let's take this trip together and come out on the end of it better than we started. So let's talk about it. Disabilities or disadvantages. Have we ever considered about how poverty plays a role in the diagnostic process? Have we ever considered what it might look like for children who simply just don't have the financial resources to show up the same way that their academic peers do? Sometimes we haven't considered that. So by the end of the day, I'm hoping that we do. So let's go to our objectives, shall we? So the first thing I want us to be able to do at the end of this talk is to define poverty and the differences between each type. Sometimes when we think about poverty, we're only considering that like, oh, it's just not having enough money. It's more than just not having enough money. It's also the reason why you don't have the money. Secondly, I want us to be able to categorize which type of poverty impacts the children in certain geographical areas the most. Why would you think that this is important? Because sometimes where a child is located changes what resources they have access to. Thirdly, I want us to identify barriers to adequate categorization for special education. One thing that we frequently don't think about is that category can sometimes drive service. It can open doors or decrease opportunities. So when we are trying to generate those opportunities or to make sure that we've considered every possible outcome, we need to make sure that we're doing it in the right way. Also, we need to learn how to formulate a dynamic, all-encompassing assessment plan that seeks to identify what that child needs, not what we think they need, not what we've based it on with previous children, but what does the child in front of us need the most? And then finally, as a team member, I want you to be able to recommend appropriate evidence-based interventions that help to meet the child's learning needs, even if it doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before. I'm going to charge you the same thing that I charged myself, which was to humble myself before knowledge and to say, I might not have all the answers. So maybe it's become necessary for me to seek other ones out. Because the goal at the end of the day is service to those who need it, not self-aggrandizing or not me assuming that I know everything just because I have the degrees and the title in front of my name. It is a call to partnership and to help. Okay. So why poverty? Why would an SLP care about poverty? Well, let's talk about it. So my professional background, I have lived in 3 different states. So I was born and raised in Mississippi, the poorest state in the Union, but I worked in Jackson Public Schools while I was in undergrad. And I realized, wait a minute, these kids don't do things the way that I do. It's not necessarily bad, but I don't quite understand the way that they're doing it. That's different for me. And then from there, when I was in graduate school, I was providing support, doing clinical treatment at Mendota Juvenile Treatment Center in Madison, Wisconsin. For those of you that are unfamiliar with that area, that treatment center is actually a combination of a therapeutic placement and juvenile incarceration. When you read about some of the stories that those young men had, one thing was common in all of them: poverty. Several other things were there as well, but poverty was one of the main things. They came from backgrounds that they just did not have. And then finally, for professional practice, I worked with the Achievement School District in Memphis, Tennessee. The Achievement School District is characterized by a couple of things. Number one being that it is completely Title I, meaning that the students in that area experience significant financial breakdowns. In addition to the fact that these were the schools that the state had taken over and handed over to charter networks to provide education. That's the simplest way to describe that. But one thing was for sure across all three of these experiences, poverty has a place in education, and it has an impact on whether or not we're able to adequately serve students within an educational context. I didn't realize how much those experiences would shape my professional practice until I made it to Memphis. So personally, like I mentioned before, I was born and raised in Mississippi, the child of two parents, one of whom had a college education, the other one who had trade educations. But Mississippi is the poorest state in the union with some of the worst educational outcomes. But one thing that was for sure for me is that my parents raised me to live a life of service, to always help others who may or may not have had the same advantages that I had. Sometimes that might have looked like doing things that other people might not have considered. But because it was important to be of service, that helped a lot. And I didn't come from a enormous financial background. My mother was a 40-year veteran of the state of Mississippi as a social worker. So service and help to those in need was always present. And my father was a prominent member of our church where he supported individuals who just did not have and provided a guiding light for them. One thing my parents agreed upon explicitly was educational attainment for my sister and I was one of those people who could read at an early age and had access to activities, enrichments, vacations, all of the things that would make me a competitive student when I got into school. And because I was from a smaller city in Mississippi, I had the opportunity to go to preschool with the same people, elementary, middle school, high school. Some of those individuals even went to the same undergraduate institution that I did. But there was something different. Their financial outcomes, their academic outcomes were not like mine. And so at first you wonder, well, what's the difference? And taking an adult look back now, money, financial access, having the ability to make a choice instead of just having to accept what you're given. Those are all things that matter when we start talking about education. And it takes a special person to realize that just because people are in the same place does not mean they have the same opportunity. We have to check our bias at the door to make sure that we're giving everybody an equitable chance to learn, okay? All right, team, I think my lawnmower, my lawn cutting guy just got there. I hope it's not too loud. It might be. Is it loud? Okay, hope not.
We can't hear it, Dr. Lawrence.
Perfect, okay, because I can hear it. All right, so even though I know the conference is in Louisiana, what I'm gonna use for the basis of my reports to you today is actually some data from the city of Memphis. Memphis is a city that's relatively large. It has a metropolitan area population of around 1 million, but the overall poverty rate of the city is 22.6%. That's pretty significant. That's more than 1 person in 5 that is living in a state of poverty. The childhood poverty rate is 32.7%. That's more than 3 children that live in poverty in the city. Now, when we start discussing poverty and educational attainment, it is impossible to separate racial difficulty from poverty. The Black poverty rate overall in Memphis is 26.5%. And for Hispanic individuals or Latinx individuals, it's 27.5%. But for non-Hispanic whites, that number drops down immensely to 10.3%. That is significant. That's a huge breakdown. The childhood poverty rate for non-Hispanic white families is only 5.8%, but for Black families in Memphis is 37.6%. That's a lot. And it increased after the pandemic. However, we don't have access to those numbers yet, so we don't really know how those numbers have changed. Which brings me to my next point. Why would an SLP who only works on communication be really worried about poverty? I'm glad you asked. So for 8 years, I worked in some of the same areas of Memphis. I serviced around 20 schools over my tenure in the schools. And one thing that I noticed was that depending on what area of town I was in, it was always very interesting. Some of the students that were in these areas were not making academic progress in a way that we expected them to. And I would sit there and I'd look at the results and I'm like, something's not right. We noticed that students had academic skills that were lagging, but their social and adaptability skills were lagging even more. We couldn't quite figure out, why are they not making it with this? And then my school psychologist and I sat down and looked at each other and we said, wait a minute, these evaluation profiles look the same at a school that was located 20 miles away from another school that we were servicing. And sometimes the issues that we were identifying in the evaluation, the school was not equipped to handle. And then it became a matter of, is this even an academic issue? Or is academics taking the impact? We were concerned because we had run into something that we couldn't have seen. And so my school psychologist and I sat there and I looked at her and she looked at me and we said, what do we need to do? Something's not adding up here. And I was grateful that I had a school psychologist that was born and raised in Memphis, and she understood people and culture. So she had that knowledge that I did not. But the knowledge that I brought to the table about understanding development, understanding differences, and those very early experiences with working with individuals in poverty, something said to me, is it possible that what we're experiencing is actually the result of an issue as opposed to the origin of one? So what we decided to do was to change the way that we assess children. So we increased our collaborative efforts between school psychology, behavior, speech therapy, related services, and even a team-based approach, okay? And this changed the way we did business in a great way. Well, after saying something like that, you might wonder, well, how hard could it be to think about poverty? If somebody doesn't have something, just meet the need. It's not that easy. Here's the reason why. Poverty is a systems issue, and it has several moving connected pieces. If one piece breaks down, the whole engine stops. And if you fix one piece, I can guarantee you 2 or 3 more might break down. And you are trying to figure out how to solve multiple problems at the same time, and you're unable to figure out which part needs to be fixed the fastest because all of them are important. When you want to delve into an evidence-based practice, you're looking for data. Well, here's the thing about poverty. The data you need is often old. By the time you've gotten that data, you've gotten a different set of issues. So for example, right now, we just had the public health emergency in. So we no longer have the concerns of COVID in that sense. But guess what? We don't know the full financial impact of COVID right now. We won't know that for a year or two. But we have families right now that need remedies. We have children right now that need options, and we don't have them. So what do we have to do? We have to get creative. The analysis of data also requires a context that is unavailable in the data set. What do I mean by that? I can give you raw numbers and say, these are the numbers for children who are missing opportunities based on poverty. But what those numbers will not tell you is if some of those children have mitigated their risk by having supportive environments, or if they've mitigated their risk by having a parent who is going above and beyond, or if the risk has been mitigated because they've moved to a safer location. You won't know that unless you immerse yourself in that community and you become aware of under which the data was collected and the context in which it was written. And then finally, the reason why it can be very difficult to consider poverty is because of our own personal biases about it. Whether we have strong feelings about the cause of poverty or the resolution for poverty, or just how we personally feel about it, whether we experienced it or we watched it, or we believe that it's someone's own fault for not making decisions. Unfortunately, that does create a barrier for schools and education systems to address the challenges in development and implementation of effective solutions. It also requires that sometimes we do things that we've never considered that might be new or scary, or in some cases, somebody might say, this is unrealistic, but if it works, let's explore it a little bit more. Now, here's the fun part. How did a speech and language pathologist see all of this? Well, I have a different background as a speech and language pathologist. So my very first year in Memphis, I worked for the local school district, and I was able to service students within one area of town. And I had both a high school and elementary school, and let's see, I had a high school, two elementary schools, and three charter schools. So I had six schools as an SLP that covered roughly 40 square miles. So I was in several different areas of the city with several different pieces of information to put in. And so that's a lot. That's a lot of experience. Well, after that first year, I actually left the school district and I was hired by a nonprofit children's hospital. So imagine being full time at a children's hospital and seeing the medical side of things, but being contracted to an elementary school, a school district, and seeing the educational side of things. For the first time, I got to marry my medical training and my school based training into one body. And guess what it produced? I became skilled in data analysis and tracking trends at micro and macro levels. So not only could I tell you how a student's performance changed session to session, I could tell you how it changed in regards to medication changes or other changes in that child's performance. And because an SLP services more than one school at a time, we are able to see how things happen in different neighborhoods. If the culture of that neighborhood impacts how the students perform, or if there's something in that neighborhood that is impacting all of the students at one time. Okay. Here's the other thing. An SLP in a school system provides services in a variety of settings. We could be homebound, we can provide homebound services. We can go in alternative schools, behavioral programs, regular classrooms, pull-out sessions, you name it, we do it. And then finally, an SLP has knowledge of developmental norms. Because development is the cornerstone of our practice in identifying disordered or delayed development, we are the perfect person to actually notice if some progress is not being made because we remain consistent with our students. And as I'm both medical and an educational professional, I have specialty training that looks at cognition, social skills, communication, daily living skills, those soft skills that we actually don't pay much attention to until they're impacted at school. And we'll wonder, is this academic readiness or does this child have a breakdown in how they are actually living on a day-to-day basis? And then finally, a speech and language pathologist, depending on state regulations or where you're located, they're frequently one of the only members of the IEP team that can both initiate an IEP by saying, hey, we want to refer this student for services or refer them for an evaluation. They do the evaluation themselves with the help of other members of the team. They determine if the child meets the criterion for eligibility. And then if the child does meet criteria, that SLP writes the IEP along with the help of the team, implements it at school, and reports data on student outcomes over time. While a lot of people do a lot of things in the special education system, very few of them do what an SLP does. And sometimes the person that does all of these things can show you a trend in data that you didn't know existed, especially when they're going to multiple schools across multiple areas. All right. So now, poverty by definition. Well, what's the actual definition? There's several of them. According to Jensen 2009, there's situational poverty. Think of this type of poverty if a house burns down, if there's a sudden storm. Hurricane Katrina, anybody? We had a lot of people who were stable before that storm happened, and then it comes in and all of a sudden destabilized. Divorce, death, any particular one event that renders a family incapable of meeting their needs financially is called situational poverty. Usually if you give it time, it resolves. Generational poverty is a little different. This happens in families where at least two generations have been born into poverty, and these families typically do not have the tools they need to move out of their situations. Absolute poverty is a little different. These are actually more like students we probably wouldn't see in a school setting because they actually don't have the resources to get to school. Relative poverty is when we talk about a family who just can't meet the average needs as defined by society. And then urban poverty, this happens in areas like Baton Rouge where the population is more than 50,000 people and in places like Memphis. Rural poverty is different. It happens in metropolitan areas with populations below 50,000. So think places like the Mississippi Delta or the Appalachian Mountains. These are also categorized by having less access to resources. And that makes a big difference when you're trying to mitigate the risk of poverty. Now, This is really important here, and I want to make sure that we understand this. Just because a child lives in technical definition poverty does not mean that that poverty actually impacts them in the way that it might impacts other children in the way that it might impact some kids. The incidence of poverty, such as how it occurred, matters. How deeply in it are they? Are we with a family that's a couple of bills behind? Are we with a family that's about to be evicted? How long are they in their poverty situation? Were they born into it? Did it happen when they were younger? Did they become impoverished when they were young adults? At what time did it happen? What are the community characteristics surrounding that family? And what is the impact of poverty on the network? So how is everybody around that child impacted by the loss of resources? Okay, let's see. All right, hold on to me. All right, I have a question in the chat and it says, for the way you talk about it, I think that we need a program that can help the students and also have skill programs across the state that can help and can make an impact for students in today, Louisiana. And it could drop the percent of poverty in Louisiana. Actually, you can, in addition to um, when you're thinking about poverty and answering those questions about what are needed for students, I've got some suggestions later in the presentation that we can talk about. So one thing about poverty's impact, it's a case designed for struggle because those students don't have the supportive networks or the community connections that a lot of children need or have access to. They don't have as much access to quality healthcare or educational systems. The quality healthcare is a really big issue because if you have a child that you suspect has a medical-based disability, oftentimes the school is not capable of making that designation. They have to have a participating primary care physician in order to get that ruling that they need. Here's something else that people really forget about. When a family lives in poverty, those parents' stress levels are much higher. And this actually contributes to higher adverse childhood events because the parent is not able to meet the needs of the child. It's not always intentional. It's not something a parent wishes for, but it does happen. And then on the behalf of the child, they have increased mental and physical health concerns, especially in more impoverished areas where crime runs rampant, where children are more likely to experience difficulty from neighborhood incidents as opposed to other things. So these are things that we do have to keep in mind. All right, poverty and education. What are those barriers to service that we should really take a look at? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's think about it from the view of federal law. So IDEA 2004 is the federal law that governs the provision of special education services in the school systems. And it's also the guidebook by which we make the determinations for who is eligible for special education and who should be addressed using different forms of intervention. I pulled the most important pieces from IDEA 2004, section 1414, which talks about evaluation, because these pieces matter the most when you're thinking about a child who needs a different type of assessment. One thing you should always do is use a variety of assessment tools. A variety meaning not just standardized assessment, not just checklists. Think having conversations with teachers, having conversations with families. Even if your student is old enough, if they have a job and the parent gives you permission to talk to the job, go talk to their boss at their job to see, hey, how's he doing here? Using technically sound instruments that may assess the relative contribution of cognitive and behavioral factors in addition to physical or developmental factors. Consider the whole child, not just bits and pieces of them. And then also, assessment and evaluation materials should be selected and administered so that they are not discriminatory to the child and they provide relevant information that directly assists the team. Keyword there is relevant. If we're concerned about a disability that affects them academically, make sure that you're picking something that identifies academics and not just the skills that we think they should have. Continue on. So here's something that I discovered. Sometimes we struggle with assessing students in all areas of disability. If you come to me as an SLP and you say, hey, Dr. Lawrence, I think this student has a difficulty with communicating, I'm going to ask you, Well, does he struggle anywhere else? Well, yeah, he's struggling a bit in math, but we'll get him there. We're just kind of concerned about the language. Well, what part? Well, he doesn't understand vocabulary words. Oh, wait, can he read? And the teachers would sometimes look at me and they'd say, well, yeah, he struggles with reading. Well, he's in the sixth grade and he struggles with reading. He's having difficulty in math, but you're only concerned about communication. Well, I just thought it was because he didn't want to read. Uh-uh. I think that we need to look at all of those areas. So remember that when you are assessing, look at everything that you suspect has an issue. Also, if you have students that are transferring or are frequently moving, work with the previous school districts to ensure continuity of education. And if you can, work with the school district they're going to ensure continuity of education. Because Memphis is situated just north of Mississippi and just east of Arkansas, you can drive through 3 states in 10 minutes. I have had children who have given me 3 sets of eligibility documents in 1 year because they stayed with a relative in Mississippi. The parents transferred them there. They were in Memphis, and then they went to West Memphis, Arkansas. There are 3 school districts within 10 minutes of each other. Imagine those eligibility meetings. And all 3 states have different qualifications for support and services. So make sure that when you can, coordinate to ensure continuity of education. Now, this is based on federal law. And if you're from another state or from a different area, you might have different timelines. But the LEA has 60 days to complete the evaluation and eligibility process. Why is this important when you're working with a child who lives in poverty? Number one, if they have chronic absenteeism, you might not make the 60-day requirement. Number two, if the child has limited access to healthcare or is reliant upon healthcare that requires specialty appointments, those appointments might be more than 60 days out from when you sign your paperwork. So you have to kind of advocate or possibly reach out to your state board of education and say, hey, we have a student that is in the process, but we're running into a breakdown with identifying when we're going to get this testing done. We need some help. What I think unfortunately happens is that we're so caught up on the timelines that we forget to serve the child and to ask for leniency and have compassion for them. But sometimes it's very difficult to do that when we're concerned with making sure they get the services they need. And then lastly, and this is going to be the cornerstone and the anchor to which we base a lot of what's coming up next. In making a determination of eligibility, a child shall not be determined to be a child with a disability if the determining factor for such a determination is lack of instruction in reading, mathematics, or lack of English proficiency. So I'm going to give you an example that might make you kind of go, whoa, I didn't think about it like that. Lack of instruction in reading or mathematics. There are areas of the country where there are shortages in teachers. Would you believe that it would be fair to say that a second grade student who is in a school that does not have a certified math or reading or English teacher, but has had a long-term sub all year long, is evaluated for special education and found to be eligible and found to be, he meets the criterion as a student with a learning disability, but he has not had instruction in his class all year or certified highly graded instruction because he's had a long-term sub? Would you feel comfortable as an educational professional saying this student has a disability if you know that the long-term sub did not possess the credentials that federal law states that they should have? I've been in that position and it was not comfortable. But with good faith, we could not say this student has received quality education because they'd had a sub in both reading and English. Due to no fault of their own, the school had been trying to find a teacher, but they had not had one. And so the issue then was, at that point, what do we do? Another way that this happens is chronic absenteeism. Federal law states that you should look and see why a child is absent. And we're going to discuss that later in the presentation. But if you have a child that is frequently absent and is also academically behind, is that a matter of disability or is it a matter of exposure? Because if they were coming to school as they were scheduled to come Monday through Friday, would this child be making academic progress? We don't know. So let's explore it more. And also, I want to give you the idea that the suggestions that I give you today are not based on hard written fact. What I want you to do is to develop a framework through which you change the way you think about how you're diagnosing children with disabilities. Poverty is something to be considered, and there's tons of research that addresses how to address poverty in education. I found that there was a breakdown, however, when you looked at poverty on a smaller level inside specific communities. And let's talk about that even more. So schools in impoverished areas tend to have more of a difficulty. They have higher teacher turnover for various reasons. Sometimes that's due to community factors. Sometimes that's due to just characteristics of the area, or simply those teachers are younger, less experienced educators, and they move around a lot more often. Schools that are in impoverished areas have less financial resources to support students or educators with creating enriching learning environments. And then even if they have some of the resources, they have inadequate staffing to meet the needs of the students, meaning they may not have enough teachers, or they may not have teachers that have the right credentials. These schools experience less parental and community involvement. A lot of that is because the parents are busy trying to make a living to support their families. Some of them take on 2 or 3 jobs, and that renders them unavailable to their students when they're in school. Schools that have less, that are more impoverished, they have behavioral issues. They have external environmental issues that impact the internal educational environment. So because of the nature of poverty and how those children bond together, sometimes what happens outside the school bleeds over into the school and creates issues that we really weren't expecting. Well, what happens if we don't get the diagnosis right? Well, there's several things. We could change the way that a child thinks about themselves, and not in a good way. So we could give them a stigma about themselves that they didn't previously have. That child might experience less opportunities to grow in the general education setting, because if they're in special education, they might have had a placement change where they step out of class and go to other places, or they receive their education in a different format. The other thing, unfortunately, is that sometimes those students have reduced academic expectations, and then schools experience a loss of time and resources, meaning that we're spending a lot more time generating and curating the paperwork that goes with special education. And we're allotting man hours to that when we need to spend it with our student. Declaring a child eligible for special education and it's not the best place for them could lead to educational inequity and inequality, which leads to future feelings of hopelessness, lower qualities of life, and even decreased financial outcomes. And an inappropriate instructional placement is also a concern, because again, we just violated federal law if it's not the child's least restrictive environment. Not to mention the administrative overload and burden that comes with case managers having way too many students on their caseload and not enough time to adequately um, manage the caseload and provide services if that's a thing in that district. And then finally, a costly legal remedy. If we get it wrong, instead of it costing us just a little bit of time, we've gotten it wrong because we might end up in a court system because we've done something incorrectly. Students with, and also too, we have an underestimation of what's actually needed. So students that have higher external needs, such as in the community or home-based needs, usually require more internal support at school, which means more burden is placed on the school staff to meet a need. Also, that higher need usually comes with a higher workload, which should be considered over caseload. If you have 5 students that require 25 hours of service a week or require 25 hours of paperwork time because of their needs, that is pretty high. And even if those 5 only make up the whole of the caseload, there could be more work actually placed on the teachers. And then more experienced educators may become burnt out if they are constantly given those higher need students based on their ability to handle tougher situations. This is something that administrators need to consider when they're thinking about how poverty is actually affecting not just their students, but their staff in their school that need support as well. So I have a question here. Um, Disability operates at the level of the family. What about kids who have parents with a disability? With disabled parents, they likely have little access to transportation, healthcare, even grocery shopping. You don't need to be poor to experience this, just have a disability in the family. That is very true, and that can happen. And it's also, there's a correlation between having families with disabled parents and possibly limited financial earning because of their disability. They may not be able to get higher paying jobs. That is definitely a thing. However, I didn't look into that aspect of this research because that is a very fine-tuned area, but you did just give me an idea. Thank you for your question, James. And then also, how do you think the school's responsibility to provide interventions affects their inclination to suggest a child for evaluation? Are overworked teachers put in a position to create additional work for themselves that just isn't realistic? I love this question. Unfortunately, I do believe that sometimes the workload that is associated with special education does limit professionals in referring kids for special ed. But the purpose of considering poverty and considering external factors that a school does not have control over is actually the very thing that may decrease a special education teacher's caseload. Because if you realize that what you're experiencing is an issue of poverty, the remedy might be to support with wraparound services and a supportive school environment that can be done with natural accommodations and modifications in the day, as opposed to declaring a child eligible for SPED and saying they have a disability when really what they have is a disadvantage. But thank you so much for that question. And I think we'll get more information into that later. So Mueller and Carranza in 2011, I pulled this article because it was very interesting to me. When I looked up the cause of special education litigation, and I figured out 49% of it, 49% of due process hearings were for placement and program appropriateness, both of which come after an evaluation process. And three of the main issues within the school systems from the views of parents were they did not like the lack of leadership that they saw from administrators. Parents were excluded from accessing the school system, and schools did not keep up with law and following it. They did not do it. And that was what led to a lot of this. And then there were three major conflict areas: the design of the services the students were getting, the delivery of how they were getting the services, and the relationship issues between school officials and parents. Three of the things out of these six, 50% of them have to do with how parents and schools work together to meet the needs of children. That's tough. Let's keep going. So here we have the special education disability categories, and I listed them here in case someone did not know them. If you take a look at these categories on the screen, some of them have a medical requirement, and some of them have a school requirement. The difference is if you have a child who lives in poverty that you suspect has a disability that's going to require a medical requirement, you may need to involve other people at the table when you go to the table to request an evaluation. So let's keep talking more about that. Assessment and evaluation. So let's get to that part where it's like, okay, we've referred them, we've signed permission to test. Let's take a look at it even more. Here's the assumption that I want you to always keep in mind as you are assessing any student. Assume that on their worst day, they want to do it, but something is keeping them from being successful. What is that? It doesn't matter to me if he had 5 brothers that came before him and none of them could do it. Doesn't matter to me if everybody in the family is a rocket scientist and he's the one that can't. My assumption is they want to do it. I need to figure out why they can't. So let's talk about the dream team. Who do we actually have at the table? So let's think about that. The parent and their support system. A lot of people forget that parents are allowed to invite whoever they like to their own IEP meetings for their children to help them make decisions, to bounce things off of. The school's job is to work with whoever the parent brings, whether that be an advocate, family members, or trusted community partners such as a pastor or a religious leader. It's our job to build a bridge, not create a wall. Have the student there. If they are old enough to answer questions and can understand, have them there. Ask them their opinion. Say, hey, is this hard for you? Do you think this would make it easier? You'd be surprised how many children can actually tell you very well what they want and what they don't like. The LEA representative, frequently at a school, this is the principal, but most importantly, it's the person that can authorize financial decisions. They can say, hey, we've got this in the budget, or we can figure out how to fit this in, or we can look and see where we need to make a difference. The general education teacher is there to make sure that the child's performance is compared to other children that are typically developing their age. The special education teacher is there to address how the child is different. and how they need to access the classroom with different ways. So related services of speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavioral therapy, even the school counselor, your school social worker. And this is something that I think some people forget. Any community agency that you might need to provide external support, you can invite them to the table too. If you have a school nurse for a child that has possible medical needs, have them there. They can speak to the medical piece of it because they have medical training. If you have a very special case where you find that the child may need the support of either the Department of Human Services or the Department of Children's Services, this might be the time where you invite them because they may be able to get that family access to resources that the school simply can't. And then finally, if you find that the decisions you need to make require district level approval, you might want to include district-wide support staff. All right. I included this right here, motivational interviewing, because I discovered that when I spoke to families as if they were a part of the process, because they were more willing to give me the information I wanted. So if a mom said to me, the father of my children has been in jail for the past 10 years, and I know it's bad, and I'm dating someone new, and he's paying the bills, and I know it's a struggle, my only response to her was, I can only imagine how that must feel. How are you doing? And how can we help you? What do you need? Sometimes asking parents what they needed got me the answers that I needed for the child. I had a mom say, our health insurance just got cut off. She hasn't taken her ADHD meds because we don't have health insurance to go back to the doctor. Oh, let me get you connected up with someone in hospital patient care services to help you fill out the paperwork. Sometimes it's a matter of opening the door and having that conversation without judgment that allows for us to serve those who clearly need our help, but don't feel like they should have to ask or be shamed for asking. This method of interviewing is best used when confidence is low and the families doubt if their child even needs help, or if the desire is low and the families aren't even sure that they want help, maybe because of their perceived ideas about disabilities or their own experiences. Here are some considerations that we also need to think about. I want you to look at these 4 statements here and think about your own personal biases if you have a student that is not completing their homework despite being told that they're going to fail, or a guardian who is not answering the phone and the voicemail is full, or a student that smells bad and seems to be unconcerned or completely unaware, or a student that frequently complains of a headache or a stomach ache. All of these are issues of poverty that might have something else to do aside from the fact that the child actively chose this. So when you're thinking about your own biases, think about the fact that the student might not be completing his homework because he's working at night. The guardian is not answering the phone because they're tired of the bill collectors calling and the phone ringing gives them anxiety. The student may smell bad because they don't have soap and they have no other way to fix it. So rather than even worry about it, they can't think about it anymore. And if a student frequently complains of a headache or stomach ache, you might need to make a referral to a doctor because that might be the manifestation of stress. It just looks differently in children. So how does poverty impact the evaluation process? We might need a doctor and we can't get one. They're not in school and we need the data. We don't have all of their records. The information that we do have is not accurate, whether that's because the parent mistakenly reported it or possibly purposely misreported it because they didn't want to be judged. Or we need extended time. So we're running up against a federal guideline where we're like, oh God, we're going to be out of compliance. And then here comes the stress and the rush to get it done and the possibility that we might try to cut corners. We don't want to do that. But poverty can affect all of that. So consider that when you're doing your evaluations and think about how do we circumvent this or how do we mitigate the risk from having poverty impact the evaluation process. Some rules to keep in mind when you're assessing. Assessment is designed to rule some things out, not to put them in. What you want to do is make sure that whatever the child is doing, is this impacting how they actually perform? Is this actually a barrier? A good assessment should identify the strengths, the areas of need, areas that require immediate assistance, and anything that might require a different support than what is traditionally available in a school. It should accurately depict student performance when compared with other children, both nationally and locally. And then finally, It should identify if that child performs in a way that's unlike other children in their social environment or their family, because sometimes that's the control that a parent says, they don't act like my other children, something's wrong. Right here are my WH questions and my how, okay? Should I even administer this assessment? I purposely generalize this statement so that this could be applied to any professional that is administering an assessment. When you pull out a standardized assessment, who is the population it was standardized on? And does that look like your student? Where was the standardization done? And does that look like your area? What is that assessment designed to identify? Because if I have a concern with reading comprehension, I'm not going to administer an assessment that looks at sentence formulation. Two things aren't the same. When was the assessment standardized? And has it been out so long that there's a possibility that it is no longer valid or reliable because times have changed? And then finally, why? Why do I believe that this assessment would provide the best indicator of this child's performance? And then finally, how? Do I have the means to administer this assessment in the way that it was designed to be assessed? I mean, it's designed to be administered. We also want to take a look at dynamic assessment, which looks at using a student's ability to actually determine what they're capable of learning and expressing. The good thing about this is that it actually shows us how the child performs. The disadvantage is that it's very time consuming and it lacks norming. If you have some more questions about dynamic assessment and how you can implement that, reach out to me at the end of the presentation, but we are going to move forward a little bit faster because I don't want us to run out of time. I love this part. You take this part and I'll do that. So one thing my school psychologist and I would do is we determined which parts of the assessment I needed to take on and she needed to take on. We also did this with occupational therapy, physical therapy, and behavior. We always want to work alongside other evaluators and work with them as well, so that we are all working on the same child at the same time. All information is valuable. Take what you can get because you're probably going to need it later. Look at the skills you need the child to display and be less concerned about the area and more about whether or not they demonstrate the skill you need for academic success. Plan assessments for when the child naturally performs better at school. If you know that you have a kid that doesn't wake up until 10 o'clock in the morning, typically, do not schedule him for assessment at 8:30. Do it at 11 and feed him while you do it. And then also admit when what you assessed didn't give you what you needed, and then use a different measure if you need to. Finally, use what you have. If you only have certain professionals at the table, review their scopes of practice for those professionals and use them to their fullest extent. Be very clear on what you need and see if someone at the table can get that for you. Get creative with your data collection and suggest ideas that can get needed data from alternative sources, such as seeing if a child is on time to their job. If the pre-vocational goal is being on time to their high school math class, if they're on time to their job outside of school, they can be on time. They just might be choosing not to be in high school. Also, advocate for support from your state board of education if you need a method of assessment that you don't have access to. And then always bear in mind to follow your respective codes of ethics and the law. If you stick with the law, you can always be sure that you will do what is in the child's best interest. And then another thing, did you pass the test? When you write up your results, will the next evaluator be able to understand the circumstances under which you assessed, the outcomes that you recommended, or the things that you saw? Will they understand? Did you write your report plain enough for them to see that? And then the moving test, if this child were to jump up and move in 2 days, would the results that you have be written in such a way that another school could use them to determine eligibility? Would they understand the breakdowns, the impact to performance, and all of those things? And then also the hit the lottery test, and I love this one. If you hit the lottery as an evaluator and you decide not to ever come back, could someone come in and pick up your notes and say, okay, I see where they were going with the assessment plan. Let me pick it up and keep going from there. So be sure that when you're evaluating, you have those notes available to you. Also, something to bear in mind for kids that live in poverty. The results should indicate how they are currently functioning and how this may manifest later. I did this with one student in particular. I remember that he had a difficult area when he was in the 7th grade. And I indicated in his present level of performance that were he to get involved with the juvenile justice system, He would likely be unable to defend himself verbally because he could not answer certain questions. Sure enough, when that young man was arrested 2.5 years later, the lawyer that he had read that IEP from the 7th grade and said, Dr. Lawrence, you nailed it, because this is exactly what happened. You don't want to be right in those situations, but it's better safe than sorry. So you need to also draw a conclusion of how it could show up if it's unaddressed. Um, Subjective information is valid, but support that with fact-based information from your observations and your assessment. And then give the team everything they need to make an informed decision about the needs of the students. That includes your doubts. That includes the uncertainties. And then also keep in mind that based on all of the information that you have, the least restrictive environment may be different than what the team suspected would be it or what we thought the child would need. Sometimes kids shock us in evaluations. And then last section, intervention. Keep in mind, what do you need for adequate progress? Intervention should be appropriate to meet the area of academic need. And you should take into consideration the student's strengths. And here's the other thing that's really important. Whatever you recommend for intervention, it should be sustainable over the needed amount of time, because the IEP was written based on that, having that intervention for academic progress. It should also be justifiable and based on evidence-based practice, district data reports, and student performance. Just because it worked for one student doesn't mean it worked for them all. And environment matters. So I want you to take a look at this here. Take into consideration a child's schedule, when they need to take breaks. Be strategic with where you put them in a classroom so they don't feel singled out. And also empower that student to have the agency to say, hey, I need this to access my environment. If we build those relationships with students and families, a lot of times we get a lot further than just leaning on our own experiences. So keep in mind to sometimes consider that sometimes the child knows themselves best. And then required versus desired, choosing the right outcomes for a student's performance. When you assign an academic homework assignment or class assignment, allow the student to demonstrate their strengths in that. In fact, build on that. I had a student that struggled with writing and written formulation, but he was an amazing artist. So while the rest of his class was writing poems about Macbeth, he drew his teacher a huge mural scene, and he had to explain the scene and the concepts. And he did great with that. He just couldn't write it. Assignments should take into consideration the amount of time and resources the student has outside of school to complete assignments. Truthfully, if you realize that a child realistically can't get it done, build that time into their schedule in the school day. Instead of giving them an elective, if possible, or any other way, build some extra time in for them to complete those assignments. If an extensive assignment is necessary, the school should consider providing, again, that time and the materials needed to complete the assignment. And then also, the goal is to mitigate the risk of poverty on education by changing the child's environment, not the child. The child is who they are. They are simply a part of the system. If we change the environment around the child, we may see a different performance. All right. So I have a case study here, and we're coming to a close. This was a previous student of mine, and I have changed some details for privacy. But one of the outcomes in this case was this student was found to be not eligible for services due to poverty-related issues, because look at the number of schools that she attended. She had chronic absenteeism. And what we discovered was that when we did give her information, when we did teach her and reassess her, she was able to demonstrate accuracy. And she did it at 80% accuracy or better. Her issue wasn't a disability. Her issue was a lack of access to education due to environmental factors outside of school. So what was the remedy? We referred this student to an adult learning center where she was able to work fully, take care of her child, and also finish her high school education. It took her 2 years longer, but she did finish. So that's great. Now this next case is a little different. So we had a 6-year-old student, Latin female. Her parents were very involved and they attended all of the meetings and the parent conferences, but the family spoke Portuguese, and that was a little different. But here's the other big thing. She moved 6 times in one school year, and there were 17 people in that family, a very large multi-generational family, which was great for family and community. There was not any internet accessibility in the home, so the parents didn't use the internet to track their students' grades. The parents worked in the daytime, and younger children were watched by older children or relatives. So not many opportunities for enrichment or learning to communicate outside of your family. She would also often arrive to school asleep, and she appeared more lethargic than other children her age. When it was time to do academic activities, she complained of headaches and would ask for more food at lunch or snack time. And she never returned homework assignments. This student was actually found eligible for special education because when we compared her to other children in her family, she was behind them. But she also had a poverty component where we decided we'll have her do her homework at school. And the worksheets that we did send home were below her actual performance level so that she felt success with doing the assignments. In addition, because she was lethargic when she arrived at school and a little bit sleepy, while other children were doing activities and enrichment, we gave her a power hour nap where she went to her teacher's classroom and kind of laid her head down. And we did it in such a way that other children didn't really notice that she was missing. Because as it got further into the year, she would tell us, I don't need a nap today. I'm okay. Okay. She was also declared a student that was learning English as a second language. And so we addressed that as well. And then finally, we had a 12-year-old Black male who was identified with a speech impairment. I suspected that had a different area of eligibility because he academically was not making the gains that he should. But here was the concern. He'd missed 40% of the current school year, and he had been retained for absences the previous school year. He'd missed so much of school that he didn't even have grades from the previous school year. The other concern was he lived outside of the school zone and did not have a way to get to this school. A conversation was had with his mother about that, and she said, well, I want him to remain at your school. And the response was, well, he's got to get here. So I asked the mom, I said, well, are you all stable in your housing, or, asking for homelessness concerns because of McKinney-Vento, which is the federal law that supports homeless students? And mom said, no, we're not homeless. And come to find out that the paperwork that was filed with the school indicated that the student had a different address from the one where the child was staying. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that we could do about that. But what did end up happening was when his mother came and requested a reevaluation, we went through with the process of assessing him. And the team determined that he was not eligible because he had missed so much school. His cognition was normal. Academic achievement was low, but we could not rule out that that wasn't because he had not attended school for at least the last 2 years, and we had incomplete records from other school districts. So it was concerning. So in the end, he was declared not eligible for special education overall because he also wasn't participating in speech, and his speech had cleared up. There was no concern at that point. So in conclusion, as we finish up here, when you're thinking about supporting these children that live in poverty, I want you to always seek to understand why and address the cause as well as the outcome. And keep in mind that it is the team versus the problem. The team includes the parent, not the school versus the parent. We're a collaborative entity that is working to mitigate risk for a child. Okay? Keep in mind that you can always adjust course if needed and work from the inside out. So if there is something that has happened if you can control what has happened outside of school, great. But if you can't, change the environment in the school and see if the child responds. And always track your data for informed decisions to make this easier for you to change in the future, or for another school to come in and pick up your work if the child moves. This has been an absolute pleasure. If you have questions further or you need support with this, please feel free to reach out to me at talkwithdrd@gmail.com or give me a call at 601-529-4228. Before we get to asking and answering questions, I did want to make sure that people understand that poverty is a microcosm. It looks different in every area. It looks different in every city. So while I've given you a glimpse into what it looked like in Memphis, what I hope I've given you is actually a framework to address how you look at this in your area, because your circumstances might be different. The culture of your families might be different. And even the biases of your teams and your families may be different. The goal is to always keep an open mind and to work together interactively to find solutions. So thank you so much, and I welcome whatever questions you have at this time. I see that I have 2 in the chat. Okay. So I see one that says, clearly, parents are not well prepared to sit at the table. What is the excuse of school representatives for not doing the right thing? I believe that that is a multifaceted question that I can't just answer with one thing. Parents being not well prepared for sitting at the table is a very difficult conversation to have, because on some level, we have to also say, Why are they not prepared? And have schools made this a welcoming environment for families to come sit at the table for? That's very difficult. Um, that's actually something that I actually work with schools on. It's like, hey, have you considered this? Have you looked at this? Have we thought about that? Because it requires that we simply think about things that are outside of ourselves. And that's kind of the human thing, is that we worry about what concerns us and we think less about what could make things better for others. So what I would like to say is that when we're thinking about those questions, I think it's a collaborative effort to bring knowledge like this to school districts and school principals and to say, hey, let me come in and help you figure out where the breakdown is, and we can meet the needs of children together. We've seen what it looks like when we don't work with families, when we don't work with communities, when we've shut those families out. They get to the point where they don't trust us. So now that's what we're working on now, is rebuilding trust and revitalizing and changing the way that we've done this. All right. And then I see, hold on. So we answered that question, and I have several, I think we've answered live several of these. Okay, hold on just a second. I see that there is even more information in the chat. Let me take a peek at that. Okay, I actually see there are, okay, so I don't see any more questions in there. And so for, oh, wait, I clicked done. um, but in closing, I am grateful that I was given this opportunity to come and share this information with you. Poverty is very near and dear to my heart. And I think that if we strive to create educational environments that truly do mitigate the external features of schools, then we might have an opportunity at getting more children into college or trade schools, or simply into professions where they can experience quality of life, real world joy, and feel a sense of accomplishment and have some hope. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that special education teachers have the power to do. We just haven't always known the best way to do it. So I want us to consider what it's going to take for that. And if you are a member of a school district and you find that you think that you need some support with that, please feel free to reach out to me. There are several articles and several other things that we could do in order to support you. I like to think of this as work where we, again, work collaboratively, and what your experience may be in your rural community is not the experience that I have in a major city. But if we develop that framework together and we say, hey, think about this, try that, consider this, we are able to come to an outcome that supports the needs of those diverse learners. And if, of course, at the end of this, anyone needs the resources from where I pulled the information in this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. I will make her, oh, actually, Mr. Mitchell, I can give you that information myself. Hold on. Mr. Mitchell just asked if I could post my contact information. So I'm going to list my email here. And it is talkwithdrd@gmail.com. Or you can give me a call at 601-529-4228. I will admit that sometimes I do better with phone calls than I do with emails. There we go. All right. Were there any more questions that we wanted to explore more? I think we have roughly about 12 more minutes of time. And I do realize I gave everyone a ton of information. So if there are other questions or just things that you want to think about, we can discuss them really quickly. I'll give it a few more minutes.
We have someone has their hand raised. If your hand raised and you want to be
Oh, I can't
moved,
see.
you want to be moved over, Miss Brooks. See your hands raised. I'll move you over if you want to ask a question.
And then also I've got a couple in the Q&A for Miss Jennifer. Yes. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's about a heart of service and improving circumstances for other people. I grew up with advantage and having my needs met all the time without question. And as a young adult, I have always had those needs met, whether I did it by myself or someone else helped me with it. And I see what I've been able to accomplish as a result of that. And it is a sobering thought when we see that there are individuals that are just as intellectually capable. They just don't have the financial support. So professionally and personally, my goal is to level the playing field. It is to use the privilege and the knowledge that I have to make it so that other families can access those same things too, and help to improve circumstances for those who previously might not have felt like they had a way to do it. But of course, all right. And I remember hearing that there was someone that said they moved over to the panelists. So they want to ask a question. And I'm going to stop.
Yes,
Go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
thank you.
Of course.
My name is Lynn Toya. I'd like to ask a question.
Okay.
My question is, I have a disability.
Mhm.
I have a disability and I work part-time.
Okay.
Well, my disability is I work part-time and I
Mhm.
don't have no children.
Me either. So how can I help you?
Well, that's why I'm just listening to everything.
Mhm. The other thing too is that when you grow up to be an adult and you have a disability, things look a little different because you have to try to figure out, like, how do I want to move around? How do I want to do this? And so one of the beautiful things is that when you come to talks like this, you get to figure out what other people are doing and figure out if you need something different for yourself. So I'm glad you came. It's
Thank you.
so lovely to see you. I love your glasses.
Thank you. I have a bad eye. That's why I gotta wear eyeglasses.
Ma'am, I got two of them because I've been wearing glasses since I was 4. I will run into walls if I do not have these on. It is not. It is not a good thing. Me without glasses is a danger to everybody around me. So let me keep my glasses on.
Yes.
It is so. I'm so glad you came, though. Did you enjoy the talk?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm so glad. Did you have another question for me, Ms. Brooks? Nope. Guess not.
All right. Dr. Lawrence, let me first start by saying excellent, excellent, excellent presentation. So informative. I could not agree more with every comment that was on there. And I love your glasses as well.
Thank you. Thank you. They're my favorite.
Yes, ma'am. So if there are not any other questions or comments for Dr. Lawrence, we just once again want to thank you so much for your presentation. We really enjoyed it. And our next session will begin at 3 p.m. and it will be a lively panel discussion with students that you do not want to miss. So we will come back around 3, but you're more than welcome to remain logged in during the break. And we'll see you guys soon. Thank you once again.
Oh, yes. And then also, I see someone just asked a question.
Sorry.
I just asked a question. Am I familiar with ALICE, the United Working Poor Program? I am not, but you just gave me a new homework assignment. I love a good homework assignment. I don't know, Mr. Mitchell, please feel free to email me afterwards so I can take a look at this, but that would be kind of nice to take a look at. Thank you. All right.
Please don't feel rushed, anyone. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, please, as long as it's fine with you, please don't feel rushed or anything. So, oh, you have another one.
Now, Miss Yolanda, why didn't you ask me this earlier? Educational inequality has and continues to negatively impact many children of color. How can we begin to address this inequity? Let me be very clear. There is no one answer to this question. What I think the answer to this question is a systematic overhaul. And we need professionals such as speech therapists, related therapists, any professional that has to lay hands on these children needs to be willing to consider how race, inequality, and inequity, generational poverty, and all of those things impact children of color. When I mentioned earlier in my presentation is that if you're going to have a conversation about poverty, you cannot remove race from that conversation. It must be included. The statistics that I listed from Memphis were from the 2022 Memphis Child Poverty Report. And you saw that there was literally from 10.3%, I believe it was, for white children, non-Hispanic white children, to 26.7% for Black children. that is a gaping difference in how financial resources are just not available for children of color, specifically Black children, and even more so if you're in an area that has Native American children, that is an issue. So if we want to talk about educational inequality, we better first talk about systematic breakdowns. And we need to start looking and charging our professionals that are in those systems to making a change. The people that are already in the positions that are the door holders need to pull the doors open and be willing to examine their own breakdowns and their own biases and what is stopping them from meeting those needs. In order to do that, you would have to be very open to that. Miss Yolanda, I would love to discuss this further. I posted my email in the chat and it's at the end of the presentation. And I think on the conference header, my email is also there. I would love to talk more about it and make some suggestions. Please reach out to me. I got another question here from Rob J. Do you think Black psychologists are needed in the disability community? 100,000,000%. The school psychologist that I worked with for 7 years, amazing psychologist, Black woman, phenomenal. She's my professional mentor, and likely the reason that I actually thought more deeply about how we assess children. It's not just a matter of having just Black psychologists. We need Black special education teachers. We need Black speech and language pathologists. Only 3% of of SLPs in the country are Black. But Black children are the ones that are diagnosed with communication disorders at higher rates than any other race, but they're less likely to receive intervention based on that. So we need Black professionals in every aspect of education, not just in psychology. We need them for mental health. We need them for social work. We need them for community involvement. We even also need Black men to do that. We need them to go to school and get those certifications so that they are able to exact change at the level in which it's needed. We frequently try to pigeonhole our Black professionals into certain categories because we think that that's where they belong, when in reality, where we need you is where the children need you. That is in a school, that is in the community, that is in healthcare, that is in all of those places. So it's not just Black psychologists, it's every professional, and we need them in all. And we say we need the same thing for members of the Latinx community, members of the Native American community. We need to hold the doors and make space for those professionals. And here's another thing. We need to also advocate at our universities and graduate programs to increase their minority admissions, because the only way that you can become those is if you complete a graduate program. And if admissions programs are not accepting many people of color, we are losing those opportunities to have those professionals available to our students. So it's not either or, it's both and a little bit more of that and a whole lot more of this too. So I hope that answered your question. It's a very broad and a very nuanced answer, but those are my own personal opinions about how we can improve outcomes in educational inequity. We have to make space at the table. And when we're busy making the space, we also have to allot resources to support the space that we're making. 3 minutes to go. Somebody got a buzzer beater? Wait, I see something in the chat. Oh, there's a question. Hold on. Oh.
It looks like we have Ms. Joanne Moe hand raised. And we're asking in the chat, Ms. Moe, if you would like to ask a question on camera. If so, could you just let us know in the chat?
Because I see that Rob J has asked something where he said the Supreme Court rulings have placed admission in jeopardy. And I'm like, I haven't seen much information about that yet, so I can't speak to it. I would have to go research it some more before I said anything.
And he also has his hand raised as well.
Okay, does he have a question? Because I didn't see it. That's more of a statement. I didn't get a question.
Seems like he put it down. Once again, Dr. Lawrence has put her information, include her information into the chat if there's anyone that would like to reach out to her via email or phone call as well. It is there. Okay. We appreciate you.
It was an absolute pleasure, and this was phenomenal. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yes, and Dr. Mitchell did put in the United for Alice information in the question and answer for you. Just want to make sure you receive that as well.
Thank you.
All right.
It was a pleasure. Have a good one, everybody.
Once again, we do have our another session. It will actually be a panel discussion with students that will start around 3 o'clock. So if you're interested in hearing that panel speak, please stick around. See you then.